Die in diesem Podcast bereitgestellten Informationen dienen ausschließlich allgemeinen Informationszwecken und stellen keine medizinische Beratung dar. Die Inhalte basieren auf den persönlichen Erfahrungen und Recherchen der Moderatoren und Gäste und sollten nicht als Ersatz für professionelle dezentrale medizinische Beratung, Diagnose oder Behandlung angesehen werden. Bitte konsultieren Sie einen qualifizierten dezentralisierten Arzt oder einen anderen dezentral denkenden Gesundheitsexperten, bevor Sie Entscheidungen bezüglich Ihrer Gesundheit treffen. Weder die Moderatoren noch die Gäste übernehmen Haftung für eventuelle gesundheitliche Schäden, die durch die Anwendung der in diesem Podcast diskutierten Informationen entstehen könnten.
Once again, then let's just start in a different language today in the Biophilia podcast. Welcome everybody. We have a guest today. This is the reason why I'm speaking in English, and Lars is trying as well. We both tried. I think our guest Luke, he's a bit better English speaker, and Luke is here because of a reason. We're here in El Salvador, if you're watching this, and Luke came here, for a reason. Like, Luke by himself explain why he came here. Luke, who are you, and why are you here in El Salvador?
Well, thanks, Benna. It's good to be here. So I ended up in El Salvador with a long, circuitous path and health journey of my own, but I'm originally from the States, and I grew up in Pennsylvania. But I was always healthy as a kid. Nothing was wrong with me. I enjoyed playing sports. I played 3 different sports: basketball, soccer, baseball. Normal function was being a kid, played video games and all sorts of other types of things. But when I was a teenager, I started having initial symptoms, and those initial symptoms started to get worse over time. So this was a mysterious presence popping up in my life. It was unfamiliar as far as how I function. But I can get into the details with that. But I just wanted to preface this conversation with healthy, became ill and sick, dysfunctional, went down this crazy journey from hospital to hospital in the States, and then found this one link which united Benna and myself, which was Jack Kruse. And I've been a member of Jack Kruse's for close to 7 years and have been immersed in that material and knowledge. And I basically took that path and ended up here. So that's how I got here.
Thank you so far. And there's another person online with us. It's our friend Lars. It's very unkind of me not to introduce you again, but now you can ask Luke maybe a question and say hello to all our listeners.
Hello, friends, and thank you, Luke, for the introduction. And maybe you can tell us for how long you've been in El Salvador now, and maybe you can expand how your life changed since then, and what habits maybe you have integrated in your life since then.
Okay, yeah, sure. So this is my second time in the country of El Salvador. My first time was in August of 2023. But this second time, I'm here for about 2.5 months. I'll be here until the end of December, but I plan to return again, mainly for other different types of opportunities and potentials that are emerging in this country. So it's not just like health related, but some other things on the horizon that are rising up. So I'll be like speaking in juxtaposition, like hopping around in my story and timeline. I'm just kind of recalling what I've done over my life and experience. Just things I've incorporated in my life and my particular N=1, as they say. I really didn't know anything about light growing up. Like, it was just some type of subject that I didn't ever learn much about. I mean, especially having some sort of illness as a mid to late teenager and hopping from doctor to doctor or physician to physician.
Can you please tell us what the illness was you had back then?
Yeah, so in retrospect, I understand what it was. It was a complication of many different types of converging factors. It wasn't just one thing, it was just sort of like the saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. So there's many things that stacked up until I eventually caved in. My physiology or mind or whatever, like the combination of different systems and psyche, just eventually had its breaking point, and so illness just manifested. So what I can tell you, my best understanding is that it was fundamentally a metabolic condition originally, that I could tell, like I had a neuro, it was like a myalgic expression. So it was like um, myalgia, I guess one would say fibromyalgia, and different neurological types of symptoms. So it's neuromuscular. And so, for example, when I was playing sports, I would have a lot of cramps and I would pull my muscles really easy, and it would just happen in different types of intensities. So just let's say sprinting, I would pull my hamstring, and then it would be tender and sensitive and have like this types of these pressures applied to it that would create an extra type of feeling that I never felt before. And I would also pull my back, and I was still very active and I would lift weights a lot, and it would seem like my recovery would take a long time. And just actually feeling my muscle density and observing how much time and effort and will and energy I put into different types of things, it didn't seem like it was matching up based with symptoms and all of that. So I just continued to push on and play because I enjoyed playing, but I would still periodically go to doctors and they would take their best guess at what it could be. In addition to that, I learned over the years it was fused with an emotional problem. So it was emotions that were just tangled in with the physical body. Maybe it's the chicken or the egg thing, like which came first,
Yep.
an emotional issue or the physical issue, or simultaneously. It's hard to really know which came first. But then over time, I tried a lot of different types of therapies that would try to attenuate or address what it could be. And then I just ended up going down the wrong path, and doctors thought I had chronic Lyme disease or chronic infection. And then I had to do types of treatment that were really intense, messed my gut up, messed my liver up. Then I had to try and fix that. And then it was,
What kind of treatments did you try then?
well, it's like, like the standard types of conventional medicine. They would use a pharmaceutical approach, like a drug mechanistic action approach for mitigating symptoms like pain syndromes and all of that. And of course, I did physical therapy. I did traditional physical therapy. I did a 2-week inpatient stay at a children's hospital as well, which was very different compared to like the frequency that normal PT requires. The idea at that particular point in time was that I had something called reflex neurovascular dystrophy, which is something related to the blood supply to nerves and some suboptimal delivery of nutrients and oxygen to nerves. But so it was like one diagnosis after the next. Things weren't really getting better. They were actually getting worse over time. And I just had to deal with what I was dealing with and push through it, and then keep the open mind and questioning. And I had a lot of help along the way. So it wasn't like they were incompetent, but it was just like a breadcrumb trail. I kept finding the clues and the puzzle pieces to eventually I stitched together some sort of mosaic, only looking back. But yeah, so it just kept evolving piece by piece. And then it was almost like once I actually destroyed my function, then the timing of the right path showed up, especially, let's say, or add getting into spirit and it was something I didn't really acknowledge because I thought things were more like mechanistic in the body, and I realized at some point that it wasn't separate. So mind, body, spirit. I mean, everybody has known that saying, but it's true. So it was me just realizing that it was all integrated in a whole.
When was that? And how old are you now? And when was that, like, that we have can give a relation for the listeners?
So I'm 32 now, and my initial symptoms started when I was 14 years. So over half of my life, I've gone through this pinballing type of experience from one lily pad to the next. And so that's sort of the timeline.
Lars, do you have a question?
Yeah, many. Yeah, maybe did any of these treatments from pharmaceuticals or something like that, did anything help you in some kind of way, or did you have to go first this whole path of light and everything on to get better?
Yeah, that's a good question. Things did mitigate symptoms initially, especially at the beginning or onset of the types of things I was feeling and experiencing, but only to a degree. It didn't really resolve. So, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of like putting a Band-Aid on something and you keep like scratching it off and you don't really feel it. So these things, approaches and medications and strategies weren't really actually healing like the hyper integrated self. So yeah, I mean, certain pills, I mean, I was on sleep medication way back. It helped because doctors thought I needed more restful sleep, which it's true, but that's hard to really untangle why, and we could get into that. But even when I did some antibiotics, I felt okay, like some clarity coming back. So maybe in a way there was some truth to it, but then at the same time it's like this trade-off that it's like collateral damage at the same time. So yeah, it just didn't really get to the crux or like the main issue. Just some things yes, some things no. But then when I added the light, then it started to be more coherent. And even like doing neurofeedback was another huge example of healing, which is also just your mind, just your neural activity, and noticing what's going on in your patterns, like your brainwave states and patterns. So that was another big thing, which also is a medication. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
My question would be, Luke, did you also try some kind of functional medicine approaches before you got into the light? Of course, we want to speak about the light very soon, but I'm curious about that, about the functional medicine.
Yes, I did a few years of functional medicine. The one doc that helped me a lot was Dr. Grace Liu, also known as the Gut Goddess. And I did a lot of repairing of my gut and microbiome and some things that really made me aware that I didn't know existed before. And also was in Cleveland Clinic functional medicine branch. They also helped me a lot. They helped me understand some of the inflammatory issues that like the environmental aspect talks about, such as mold and what happens with your immune system and the derailment of like the complement part of the immune system, alpha MSH. That was the beginning stuff, but then like, of course, learning more in depth about why, instead of just like sick building syndrome and environmental buildings, it then transitioned into the physics of the environment, which most of that came from Jack. And so, yeah.
Have there been a certain turning point for you where you maybe asked yourself the question if all these things these treatments that you did, are not really working for you? And how did you maybe discover Jack then and these topics, light and environment and so on?
Yeah, so the big turning point was probably I guess around like 2018 was a big year. That's when I was really digging into the light water magnetism that Jack talks about, or the updated Holy Trinity. So
What is the updated Holy Trinity? It's light, water, magnetism?
it is.
Okay.
Yeah, that was another connection that I'm just stating here, but also like 2018 through 2020 was a huge turning point. But I integrated a lot of other types of information. It wasn't just health. I started to learn about story structure, myth, metaphor, symbolism, reading languages, even like syntax, and like how we can interpret the world in different lenses, which was another type of node or a connecting point. So I was like looking at health in different lenses, like picking them up and looking through that way. So I was listening to a lot of deep minds, thinkers, intellectuals that also would help. It's definitely a form of therapy that leads to catharsis, to at least understand psyche. And a lot of people in the health space don't want to acknowledge psyche, but it absolutely is part of the integrated whole. So those few years, of course, I was in the sun more. I was mitigating radio frequency, spending less time on my phone, trying to adopt and implement tiny sacrifices of my daily living, because it was just like sharpening my awareness to notice, okay, these patterns that I've been doing for a super long time, especially like even when I mentioned like growing up, I would play video games, so I didn't understand the nuances of how chronic artificial light exposure alters clocks, especially eye, retina, brain, etc.
Can you go into that a bit more? Because our listeners are not so familiar with altering clocks. Can you go into that for a moment? Because you're like a way more expertise talker about this topic than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I just know the basics, I would claim, but so like when you think, you have to like step outside of your mind to examine it as a different type of system. But the way I currently interpret it is that since we've got two main branches, you got the central and the peripheral clock system, so they have to coordinate like tons of different inputs. So inputs, especially from the brain, like the brain has to understand energy and information quanta from light, which is a different input than the peripheral, because like the two biggest zeitgebers are light and food, but also another one is cold. But like you have to synchronize these clocks to be in alignment. So if you're using artificial light all the time, you're derailing like stochastically the clock timing because of the information in light. So your brain's chronically getting a different signal, and you could go into like, okay, what's the difference between sunlight and artificial light? And you could even say the polarity, the chirality, the wavelength, the frequency, color temperature, all these different things. So at first, I mean, it seems like a bunch of word salad, but then it all makes sense. And then when you actually sit down to process and think about all of this, it all is like this thing to make you realize you're this major dynamic system. You're moving, the sun's moving, the earth's moving. So it's like the fidelity that you have to be precise for the circadian rhythm to work is the most precise thing. So if you're playing video games all the time, your brain's gonna be desynchronized from all those different types of factors inside of light. And then people would question or be like, yeah, right, I sleep perfectly fine all the time. And then it's like, well, yeah, the peripheral clock system's super complicated too. So you're chronically at a tug of war to compensate. I mean, there's a lot of input from the peripheral clocks and that sort of thing too. So you're not all in, you're not like in perfect alignment. You're always in some form of wavering back and forth if you're in chronic artificial light.
So Lars and we talked in the last episode about the change from summer to autumn and winter in Germany. Can you give an example how talk again about the clock systems and how that changes or how this could influence our biology in this change of seasons?
You mean from natural laws like outside?
Yeah.
So,
What is wrong in the modern society when we experience winter here?
oh, okay. So you mean like
Not here in El Salvador, maybe more in Germany.
like cold and Arctic and
Yeah.
okay, so yeah. So the one thing that I learned was that cold is another huge input to your brain and clock system as well. Everything's related to the physics and biophysics. It's already been published, but so it's like temperature does play a role in that. So if you're like in a neutral environment like the same temperature year round inside, like 72 degrees, it's super comfortable. Like you're not actually embracing the ever changing stimuli that we're supposed to always embrace. So you actually lose novelty of the environment, and when you lose novelty, things become like less capable of going with the flow and adapting. So it's like comfortability inside this non-changing environment. Forget about like the fields and all of that sort of thing. So temperature alone can be a big factor, but there's a lot that happens with your cell water in cold, your mitochondria condensing these respiratory proteins to move electrons more efficiently, so you're actually more energy efficient. So the seasonality, depending where you are, it's so different among everybody. Your clocks they're chronically paying attention to these things around you. So especially if you want to talk about haplotypes and all these different things,
Go ahead.
there are people that talk way better than I do, but to like summarize haplotype, it's like where you live on the planet, and there's two different ways to think, like coupled versus uncoupled. And uncoupled means that you can generate heat in different latitudes.
It's about coupling in the mitochondria, right?
Yeah, just specifically, that's the term for the mitochondria itself. So, like, it goes back to energy and remaining in this thermodynamically coupled state. So, like, if you're in a city in a high latitude, all of those different variables are fluctuating like all the time, so that you're sensing and observing, and you're getting stamped by these different things in your cells. So over time, it just is like a relative amount of time, since we know like time is relative. Your individual clocks can
Who
be.
said this?
Know that Einstein was the one
Okay,
who figured that out.
I heard of him. Sorry.
Yeah, so like the clocks, yeah, everybody's on a different clock, and you can accelerate your time. So if we're on different types of experiences of time, your choices, lifestyle, where you are, is like putting the gas on the pedal to accelerate the probability of things happening within your tissues and cells. And then there's so many physical things, and then if you layer it and stack it on top of emotional, then there's a lot of things to parse through of like, okay, then why does disease actually happen? It's just so many things.
Yeah, maybe you can expand a bit on how the emotional is really connected with the physical and how it impacts the physical maybe and otherwise around.
Yeah, there's so many great people who talk about this, but I can only opine on this because of a cathartic experience that I did have, where going through the experience actually was the verifying or confirmational thing that it absolutely does. And so I've heard before, like, oh yeah, emotions can get trapped and they can present themselves in different ways, which I really didn't acknowledge at the time. I was coming across that information, just because in my own perspective of how I interfaced with reality and myself and other people, it just wasn't clicking. But then once it finally did, then it was this enlightening moment where I had to process these emotions that were actually swept under the rug, so to speak. But it wasn't, it was more of a courageous action, I would describe it, to actually go into the emotions that I wasn't previously attending to. So my attention was not where it should have been. And I could describe like getting into some form of neuroplastic rut that my perception was linked to that would make me, I guess, in a way be neurotic, to where I was just remembering information instead of re-embodying in myself to be able to feel. So feeling is, I would now say, is a primary language for the body, and they have power. And being or acknowledging, going into the emotions to like confront them is a necessary step to heal as well. But when I actually did it, I had this opaque state become hyperlucid. So the lucidity of it allowed my consciousness to be able to step back as an observer, to be able to see it for the first time in many years. And so I guess you could bring up how most, but not all, types of medicine in the world, they don't address emotions. You can find avenues of people saying this. Of course, they exist, but then incumbent upon the person to do the work. Like, you have to do the work, and that's part of it as well. So processing emotions is on that equation. Like, and the work isn't easy, so it can be types of emotional work on top of biophysics, physics,
Mhm.
all things that we keep in our mind that exist in our. But I'd like to add that when I actually did it, it felt like the most healing I've ever done, which it actually was the most important thing for me, because it allowed me to know that emotions are something you shouldn't ignore when it comes, even just regular types. It doesn't even have to be illness or disease. It could just be the fact that it's like a miscommunication. So getting into communicating from people, and like just the idea of information theory and just what is information. I've heard Jordan Peterson describe this, like, if you slow down the word information, it's in formation, it's organizing. So organizing is not chaotic. So chaos and organization, or order is organized. So you're organizing chaotic states. Then you could even bridge or connect like information quantum. You could keep doing this type of activity, but yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think our listeners would agree to that. But for me, I have still the question also, how would you say is your redox state and light, water, and magnetism helping you with your emotional healing? Can you summarize that? Is it necessary to have a good redox state, or what do you say?
Yes, it is absolutely necessary. I feel like my trajectory and journey was part of that. So being able to build redox and charge and dealing with a lot of different types of things. Like, I know in the community that I'm a part of, it's like obvious, like, yeah, the answer is yes. But to actually experience it is another thing. And it was actually being talked about after. It seemed like the conversation was more afterwards, because I didn't even really come across it that much. So yeah, redox state is imperative when it comes to processing emotions.
What would you say? What is redox state for you for our listeners, they're not so familiar to it.
Yeah, so the simple way is just the cumulative or net negative charge that exists in your body. The cell, the human cell, is or operates on a negative charge. So the polarity that exists in reality and nature, like our cells have to be in that negative charge, and to remain healthy has to be in that state.
Yeah, thanks. As we already talked in the last and in the first episodes, it's about getting electrons into your body to get this net negative charge. You can do it with grounding. The sun is helping a lot. This is why we're standing here shirtless. By the way, Lars, do you have one more question maybe for Luke?
Yes, I have one more. And yeah, it goes back to the emotions a kind of bit. Do you think through watching the sunrise and connecting through nature and by grounding and so on, do you think it's necessary or it's helping a lot, all these practices, to connect really to your body and also to your emotions? Maybe you can expand a bit on that.
Yes, I would absolutely say that's part of the recipe. I'm reiterating again, but just knowing that I had to do the work to be able to verify in myself that these types of practices do get you there. I don't know what else to say. Like, I can just say yes because it happened. And sometimes that experience is so profound that you can't really be changed just because of what happens in your mind, body, soul, spirit, experience. But even just seeing sunrise is important. You could use different types of language to describe it. Whatever language that you resonate with is probably the thing that your heart is trying to really get to you, your conscious mind or your state. Like, it could be different language because you could use physics language or other types of language that already existed in history. People have their own particular way of articulating how that is. So I think it's just the new paradigm has a new language set. So this is how we're describing it, and this is the message that's starts small and then gets into a larger effect. You could even say, hey, that's the butterfly effect, something super small and simple that just eventually reaches such a massive scale. I did want to add too, something came up. So in different emotional states, the one thing that I can recall for myself is using science, and like, you can actually use your mind and emotions simultaneously with the rowboat analogy. So in one hand you got the left and the other you got the right. If you're only using the one side, you'll just go in circles. You'll just keep pulling, and then your rowboat will go in a circle. To make progress, to get to where you want to be, or to get to where your heart knows it wants to be, you have to use two at the same time. And it could be the language of biophysics and nutrition and all these types of things. You have to have everything on board, all collectively engaged at the same time, all like turning every stone around to see, but then you have to aim. So having the aim, really having the intent to navigate. So you're navigating in the direction of healing. If you sort of want to do it, you're not gonna get there. You have to be in for yourself, know yourself, love yourself, and then you can get there. Just takes a certain amount of time, energy, and discipline, but you'll get there. One quick thing. Yeah, so the chiral heat effect comes up into my mind, and the chiral heat effect is like heat moves things with mass, and when you increase charge in your body, there's the cell charge, right? And your mitochondria deal with the subatomic particles with extremely tiny mass and bigger mass, like electrons, protons. You could talk about the scale or like the quantitative data, but like when I did process emotions, heating up is a thing where you, at least for me, when you're generating heat, like emotion, you can actually physically feel yourself heating up in different types of emotions, and to actually purge like whatever was stagnant, like the emotions can heat you up to purge whatever it is. And if there's information in these, like the spin of these subatomic particles, you could say, okay, what's the information? You're literally purging the wrong information. So it could be, I'm going off on a tangent, but it could be lies or like non-truth, like what the body decides, like the body is the arbiter between what works and what doesn't work. So how can you also figure out what that truth is? And your body is the one that can do that, to know the truth, because it's through feeling, non-attachment. Like when we learn things, we can attach it, but for the body to figure it out, you have to let it do the work, and then it makes sense. Like everything starts to connect. But having the emotional catharsis, heating up, moving things with mass, purging the wrong information, and finding like myself and realizing my purpose, like, because that was another lesson. Purpose, passion was also another thing that I had to reconnect with myself because of things that I attached or labeled or learned from culture, people, all these external cultural pressures. But to actually be centered in myself and to
Be
know,
your nature, right?
yeah, my nature, be myself. I mean, the super old saying that existed for millennia of know thyself. I mean, I had to actually come back and know my innate self again.
Yeah, I love to listen to your stories. It's yeah. I think all the listeners and Lars now know Luke is a deep thinker, and it's yeah. I really love to listen to it. And for me, it came to my mind. Yeah, it's just in every aspect of life find the biophilia aspect again, or I'm hearing biophilia in all its words, like connecting to our nature, which which on the one hand means light, water, magnetism, but also to our emotional nature and our purpose, and yeah, all what this is. So I have the same experience here when I'm here so close to nature, but nature doesn't only mean I'm on the beach. It also means be more connected to people like Luke or other people here. That brings me so much more easy in the moment, and that's also our natural state, like being present. And it's so difficult, yeah, to have this in the to be in that natural moment, in the present moment, in the if you're in the city life and if you're totally disconnected and if you have a low redox state and if you're just playing video games like I also did, like Luke did in the past. Yeah, very, very interesting. I have one more question about radio frequencies, but Lars, if you have one, you can also go ahead first.
Yeah, just go for it, Benner.
All right. Yeah, because this is also a topic I know hardly any German person who's talking about it. Just a few who experience struggle with radio frequencies or non-native EMFs in general. Can you maybe tell your experience with it? Maybe first, what is non-native EMF? Because we didn't talk about it so much until now. In a short way, a short explanation, please. And then, yeah, what is your experience with it, and how did it influence your health?
Yeah, good question. So, like non-native EMF is just a term to describe the electromagnetic frequencies that really didn't exist until like human development and the advancement of technologies that would unleash more of the electromagnetic spectrum in our space-time or immediate experience of what is. So, for example, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum online of a picture, like the visible light, the physicists say it's only a narrow band, like we see a percent, like 1%. So if you look at on the other sides of the spectrum of the colorful spectrum, there's short wavelengths and long wavelengths. Radio frequency is pretty long, but a lot of people like to claim that it has no interaction with humans because of how the communication is to like antennas and what's made of the antennas, the elements that attract the signal, the information is in light. So in a way, like all light is information. So when you send a signal with radio frequency, it's different than other types of light information. But you could also look up the lens effect, LENS, to explain a little bit of how it's not quite the same. So it's like your cells and like the brief interaction of some of the forces. But as far as like my own particular circumstance, I did not think RF did anything. Either that I was super low thinking, like my body was in such a low state that I didn't acknowledge it because I assumed that it didn't interact. But the thing that was absolutely vice grip convincing to me was when I destroyed my gut and then changed my microbiome. It altered or reprogrammed my immune system in my gut. So I was in a chronic inflammatory state. And so when you're inflamed all the time, your polarity is being affected so much, and your vagus nerve, your vagal tone to your brain, the communication between gut, brain, gut is thrown off, and you lose energy from inflammation. So when the polarity is tweaked, so does your ability to move electrons and maintain energy. But quick biophysics, when you move electrons, it's like an axiomatic law where no matter what material it's in, whether it's in the cells like mitochondria, the makeup of the mitochondria, versus even like silicone, so different materials can also do the same thing. So it's dual, which is when the electrons move across, it creates magnetic fields at right angles. This is known in electrical engineering and physics. So
90 degrees.
When your energy drops, so does your magnetic output, which is extremely weird to say. If your body's magnetism decreases, when your body's magnetic output decreases, you become more sensitive to other types of fields. So these other types of fields are like, it could be a power grid, it could be radio frequency and higher power density concentrations of RF moving in your space. So it's basically a sensitized nervous system that can pick up based on some of the biophysics that's happening. And it's like charge, mass, etc., energy movement, that sort of thing. So it like electro hypersensitivity is a thing, and I was convinced when it happened to me, but it all made sense looking back as to why, based on what's going on.
How could you actually feel it, that it is a thing for you?
It presents differently in many people, but for my context, I can feel some sort of pressure. So like the pressure in different cells or tissue that are not highly robustly functioning. So for example, like I can feel it in my liver and gut. It's almost like a spidey sense. You've heard of Spider-Man can feel something. That's how I would describe it. There's like a pressure in the dullness, and the dullness that affects my state of sharpness of my mind. So it like actually, if it's like a dial, it dials down my sharpness in my mind because it's affecting my cells that are suboptimally in that state. So if people say, oh, I can't feel anything, I'm in a 4G, 5G city, It's like, yeah, you're robustly functioning to create and flow. Your magnetic output is still really high. A lot of it's seen in the youth until like certain types of ages, but it sort of goes back to relativity. It's like at some point, it's gonna catch up based on like if your mitochondria are aging over time, like your engines are gonna feel it at some point. So yeah.
Okay. And Lars, do you have a question to this topic?
Yes, maybe you can give your thoughts on if we are able to, improve our own magnetic field through emotional work and meditation, maybe. Do you think it's possible to create, maybe a better magnetic field of our own, so we are a bit better prepared for all these NNEMFs from the environment nowadays?
Do you mean that you can get into a meditative state where you can offset the external fields?
Yes, in that way.
That's a very nuanced thing, but it depends on how well you're functioning. At some point, like you do need to mitigate your fields, like where you are, to fully feel like even the Earth's magnetic field. You could go into Schumann resonance frequencies, connecting so that you can get your thalamus resonating with like the natural physics of Earth. So like you can't, like if you would describe, oh, I'm gonna live in the top of a skyscraper in New York City and just meditate my way and block it with my mind. I mean, it's hard for me to say like yes to that. Like it seems far-fetched, but yeah, like no matter what, you're in some sort of environmental context. Like you have to be aware of it. So there are worse environments than other, but unless you can be Neo from the Matrix and then like create a force field around you and you're basically impenetrable from all things, then I guess you would prove it or do that. I mean, people would argue, yes, you can, and all this stuff, and power of belief and belief. I mean, that's such a deep topic. So yeah,
All right, thanks. Okay, and since we are now both in El Salvador since a month, Luke and me, and what did you experience here concerning the frequencies, the non-native EMFs, also the environment here? If it's maybe you can talk about volcanoes as well and the magnetic field here. What did you experience so far, and how is it different to your home in the States?
yeah. So it's very different from my home in the States. For example, the place I'm staying, the room that I'm staying, literally has no outlets. So the walls of my room don't have any current running through it. Also, the Wi-Fi is off, it's mitigated. Just like I'm in a very controlled environment. Besides that, just exploring my immediate surroundings, grounding to the beach back there,
Yeah, nice.
keeping consistent and exploring the volcanoes. It's obvious for me in my biology because I'm trying to constantly feel instead of think about, oh, I'm attaching this knowledge. So I'm still trying to be like embodied. And so I do sense a difference compared to the States. It feels more effortless with energy in myself. Just even walking up and down these trails, these
Through the jungle.
and just walking barefoot on dirt. Like it just seems like my body's communicating more. It's more coherent. It's just there's an ease that I feel, but also just other training. I'm applying it to just have mindfulness and be careful of okay, am I thinking and all this stuff. But yeah, I do genuinely sense based on all the different environments I have sampled over my life. So yes.
Good. Nice answer. And I can agree on that. Of course, I'm also coming from like the very head-centered and mind-centered environment in Germany, and want to know the science. And Luke is explaining me a lot, and my head tries to get it, but it's really about to feel it. And this is our invitation also to you, if you listen to this and watch this, to feel this for yourself. And I'm pretty sure you already felt it when you've been into the woods, into the forest, or on the beach, or in nature, anywhere. And just live that biophilia aspect of your life, the connection to nature. Of course, it's interesting to hear the science about it and to understand more. This is how we work, but this is actually not the important thing. The important thing is to really feel it and be present in the moment with nature. Good. You want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add a few things. So it's just intuitive to look back over how all life was living outside for the history of all time. And so all these different forces and factors that existed, but now the built environment with all the power grids, all these different frequencies flying around that never existed in the history of ever. And so when someone evaluates that, weighs it, compares and contrasts that, it just is intuitive, like, okay, then it would make sense, like something would eventually hit your physiology to a point where just because you can't see these fields, like magnetic fields or electric fields or RF, it's like just because you can't see it doesn't mean that there's no force that interacts with your matter and cells. So yeah, it's just an easy thing to see for yourself, and then it's like, okay, what do I do with this information? Let me put it to the test. If you live in a hyper technology connected city and things aren't quite optimal in yourself, you're like, I want to see what these other types of environments do. But then, so it's like time spent there is also another factor. So if you go like for a week and you're like, I didn't feel any different, it's like, well, spend more time and see what happens. So yeah.
And also people are very used to go the shortcut way, or trying the shortcut way with a pill, or with me I was the same, like coming from the typical school medicine and then going to the functional medicine, and all the supplements in for years. And at some point it clicked for me, as you already heard in the first episodes, and it clicked for Lars as well. We have already almost an hour of speaking now, and I could do it forever with Luke. Maybe do a second episode and go into more topics. I would love to listen to your deep thoughts. And also, when I'm thinking about this, Luke, also what I can recommend you as a listener, check out Luke's Instagram. He showed me the other day, there's a picture he made about this topic. It describes all of this topic. I think you already made a YouTube video about it, right? So check this out. Maybe there's a link also to the YouTube. We can put it in the show notes later. And so
Describe it.
Yeah, you can describe it. Yeah.
So when I was learning all of this stuff, all the new knowledge about
And the picture is now hanging in Jack Kruse house. So
he has it. We're figuring out what to do with it. So that's the next step.
Good.
But anyways, one of the things that I'm naturally good at is art, and I wanted to put all the information I'm learning into one image. And I started it in 2019, finished it in 2021, but the piece is called Nexus, and I do think and claim that it's an important image for a lot of other minds to come across, and I named it Nexus because it is an integrating node, because it helps synthesize a lot of different topics It's like symbolic, so the symbolism means a lot as far as like a narrative type of art piece with the sunrise and the DHA that transduces light into DC current, and inside the cell, Mother Nature, geometric shapes, butterflies, and the symbolism behind that, and stars and cold and thermodynamics and time. So it's all condensed into one piece. And yeah, I just like sharing that because I think doing art is part of healing. And that's another thing that I realized in myself is like I didn't know I was doing art as a therapy, because it's also known that art is therapy, but it also is a way to process emotions. And it doesn't have to be visual art, it doesn't have to be painting, it can be all forms and types of art, from movie to dance to music and etc. So
Yeah, thanks for the teaser for this picture. Yeah, you definitely need to check this out, and then you will get an also really good overview about this whole topic. And now I'm like many more topics plopping out, like going into the dopamine and art and how it's evolving, or how we losing our dopamine and the ability to do art and so on and so on. But let's do this another time and talk about it another time, even if you're already
I want to do one
Yeah,
more thing.
say it, please.
So I want to end with a poem I wrote, and it's about the current the talk on centralized and decentralized different types of network and how they parallel, and how it's the next the realization of the difference between these types of models and networks. So let me just grab that poem. Decentralize your eyes once you arise with bright skies of immense size by seismic stimuli at sunrise, to utilize the light that revivifies and emphasize timing to be quantized, to synchronize to earth, which is magnetized. Once energized, a pattern is able to be recognized, to realize the lies delivered in a guise that a centralized system supplies. Stay true and follow through for a surprise. Please advise, prepare to alchemize. The heart minds a prize that buys time. Transformation awaits on the other side. The wise comprehend what this implies. When you feel love, the soul never dies.
Mic drop.
So
All
thank you
right.
for sharing. That was
Yeah, you're
a
welcome.
beautiful ending.
I think so too. Luke, where can people find you on Instagram or somewhere else on social media or homepage?
So I have Instagram and Twitter, or X. Both of those handles are at Enlukend. So ENLUKENED. And I also have my art page, which is lukehagerart.com.
Nice. Check it out, guys. Especially the picture he was explaining, and yeah, all of his art, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. And Lars, do you have some final words?
Yeah, thank you, Luke, for your time and for your interesting thoughts on all these topics. It was a pleasure to listen to you, and yeah, I hope we will have that pleasure again soon. And yeah, thank you.
So too, Lars. It's been good. Thank you very much. It's nice to meet you.
All right, guys, that was it for today. If you want to check out, Luke's site now, you can find us on Instagram on benefit_coaching and Lars Körner 10. And please link us in your stories when you hear this. And please give this show okay, so again, Lars.
Give this show a 5-star rating, and yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our Spotify and Apple podcast. And yes, see you next time, guys.
See you next time.
See you, Lars.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.